Crystal Boyd, pleasure to finally meet you and to have this conversation with you.
Yes, thanks for having me. So I actually have never tried Instagram Live yet. So
I,
that's your claim to fame here. I was like shaking trying to figure out how to like sign into the room. So I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad it's
I,
working.
I figured that, and I'm glad I was the first one. Definitely wanted to ask you that. How does it feel to be on the other end? Because you're now here promoting your memoir, which we're going to talk a lot about. But I saw most recently you were just back on a news set over there in
Yep.
Atlanta.
Yep.
You kind of just felt back to normal in that kind of environment?
You know what? I gotta say, I wish I had a little bit more sympathy for the people I interviewed while I was doing it because I was like, this is easy. You're just answering my questions. You don't have to think. Just, say whatever you feel. And now being on the other end, I understand their like nervousness or their anxiety or how they feel about having to answer questions. So it's definitely different being on the other end. Hopefully I'm not awkward and too rusty at this point. But it is nice, to even just be interacting with people and talking about important topics throughout the day.
I want to know a little bit about where did you grow
Sure.
up?
So my parents are refugees from Vietnam. My mom worked in a nail salon. I actually learned Vietnamese before I learned how to speak English. I'm a little rusty now. If you and I did a conversation in Vietnamese, I could probably do it, but I don't know if I want to embarrass myself that much quite yet. But grew up in California. My dad was an engineer, so very kind of stereotypical Asian family. And I think because of that, my experience, like so many different people's, like there just was a desire to fit in California, just because I was maybe one of 12 Asian students at my entire school. So the stories about getting bullied, just wanting to fit in, feeling like an outsider, feeling like an outcast, like I relate to that very much, even though, people may see me as someone who is on TV and who is a certain way. I definitely still have that background that people may not know just from seeing me on TV.
Just so I can get an idea, what part of California would it be, the northern or southern
Yeah,
part?
good question. So it's the North Bay area, so about 2 miles north of San Francisco, or two
Oh,
hours, excuse me, north
two
of San
hours.
Francisco.
Okay, so
Yes.
because you said you were one of 12, I'm like, you have to
Yeah.
be a little bit further out because the Bay Area has quite a large
Yeah.
Asian population.
Yeah.
And so my next question that I want to ask you is, why did you choose the being a journalist and getting into the whole news industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I don't know if it was like this for your family, but certainly for my family, them being immigrants, I think with a lot of Asian families, they wanted to like learn about the world and it was through news. So my dad always had the TV
They're
on, news
obsessed with
was
the news.
always on. Yes, they love watching it. They want to see what's happening. I mean, it's how you learn English, right? Like we would watch it with closed captioning on. That was kind of how my family, got to know the world around them when they were immigrants. So the news was always on. And I think a part of it maybe was Connie Chung. A part of it was my mom was always like, don't you wish you were on TV and doing this and that? So I think they kind of nudged me towards the route of being a TV news reporter. And it seemed fun. I mean, back in the day, I felt like reporters were always doing these adventurous things. They were always at exciting scenes. I mean, now the news has gotten very negative and dark. Obviously, there's a lot of shootings and hurricanes, tornadoes, stuff like that that isn't as fun to cover as I think news was back in the day. But I always had the interest because it was always a part of my life, and I saw people doing it and it made me feel like that would be, the cool career to do. And then especially for my mom, I think she liked the idea of just knowing what I was doing every day, just for
So she could tune
purely
in
like
and
mom.
see you.
Yeah, so she could see what I was wearing. She would text me right away in the beginning, like, I don't like that dress. Can you wear it? So she would always know what I was up to, what the topic of the day was. So in a weird way, it was also my parents' means of like keeping touch with me and kind of keeping tabs on what my work life was like. And that's not something other parents, are able to do with their own
I,
kids.
I want to get right back to let's talk about your journey as a reporter and then which led you to Minneapolis and stumble on this very big story here in the United States, the George Floyd incident.
Yeah. So where do you want me to start? Just
Sorry, I guess just from your journey as when you first as your first maybe station that you worked at.
Sure. So I actually moved to Hawaii after going to school at Tufts University in Boston. I was in Hawaii doing Teach for America. So if people don't know, it's basically a program where they send college graduates and young professionals into Title I schools, which means I think it's like 80% of students have to be on food stamps, essentially. So they have to be below the poverty line.
Okay.
So I taught at a Title I school, and it was really impactful. And teaching journalism, which was what I actually got to do, made me think like I actually also want to be out there like practicing it. So after I did Teach for America, I decided to go back into the newsroom, and my first job was at a Hawaii TV station, but I had no on-air experience at all. So
Okay.
I was basically just like the reporter's assistant, like whatever they needed, coffee, printing paper, researching stories, making phone calls, I did it all. And so at the end of about a year there, I was like, you know, I feel like I'm doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I just try being the actual reporter instead of doing all of this behind the scenes work, right? So what I did was I convinced a few cameramen called photogs in the industry
Photon.
that if they went out on a shoot and they didn't have anyone carrying their equipment, I would come and carry their equipment for them if they shot me doing like test reporting stories. And that was like the trade I did. So I would work like 8 hours as a reporter's assistant. I'd stay for another, 5 to 8 hours even just to follow these different photogs around. And that's how I got my training.
Wow.
And so once I had, so then it was like major secret hustling, I guess, a little project. So
I love that.
thank you. So once I had enough clips from, different photogs, like shooting videos of me, like fake reporting and stuff, I started auditioning for different TV stations. And they make you go in and you do like a writing test, a grammar test. They send you like, a fake story and have you write on it just to see if you can qualify. So I did a bunch of auditions. My first job was in Washington State. My second job was in Rhode Island. Third job was in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah, Rhode Island. Third job was in New York City. And then fourth job was in Minneapolis. And I was in Minneapolis for about 6 months. And that was when George Floyd was murdered. And my whole world changed from that moment. And so did everyone.
So for those who are not familiar with the George Floyd incident case, if you don't mind giving a brief background on it.
Yeah, sure. So in Minneapolis, you might have seen the video. George Floyd was a Black man. Someone called 911 saying that he used a counterfeit, so a fake $20 bill. Some police officers showed up. They tried to arrest him. They claimed, which not from what I could see and the jury saw, that he resisted arrest. And instead of just arresting him, Derek Chauvin, a white officer, ended up pinning George Floyd down to the ground and kneeling on him for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And by minute 7 was when George Floyd was unconscious and died. And after that, some of the biggest riots happened. It started in Minneapolis and it kind of swept all around the country.
Why do you think it triggered? There's been a lot of terrible things that happened. Why do you think that particular case triggers so much of America?
Because it was cruel to such an extreme extent. I mean, 9 minutes and 29 seconds is almost half of a 30-minute TV newscast, because after commercial breaks, every TV newscast is only 23 minutes or so. So imagine sitting and watching news and seeing a man die in front of your eyes for half of the segment. That's what the country watched. And
the entire segment was aired the entire time. So
no, we didn't.
Okay.
But I'm saying for comparative purposes, that's why this shook the country, I think, to such an extreme. If people saw that viral video that was leaked, which was how people found out that Derek Chauvin did actually kneel on George Floyd and kill him, as opposed to what they tried to cover up and say in the beginning, it was problematic because it wasn't like the violence you see on TV that happens so quick. Like you see someone shooting someone, they die, that's it, it moves quick. With George Floyd, we watch a man get murdered and we had to sit there for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And I think that was why the country was full of rage, was because within that time, anyone could have changed their mind and stopped this Black man from getting killed, but nothing happened to stop it.
I know there was also, there was an Asian American man, right? I believe that was also another officer that was saying,
Tutau.
Yeah, and he got from some of the social sites that I follow, I think they were outraged. The Asian American community was really outraged that he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And yeah, was he also charged with
Yeah,
with the case?
so I can give you context. So there were four
Please.
officers that were at the scene. The white man kneeling was Derek Chauvin. He's the one that murdered George Floyd. There were three other officers that showed up that day. So one, you're right, was Tu Tao. He was the Asian officer, Hmong American, born in Minneapolis, but parents were of Hmong descent. He patrolled the scenes. So Tu Tao's role as an officer that day was to keep bystanders back. The other two officers that showed up, they also helped Derek Chauvin and they held down George Floyd. So George Floyd had three men holding him down for 10 minutes. The other two officers, one guy was actually biracial, so he was half black and didn't stop it. And then the other guy was white, but he tutored at black elementary schools. So the whole story is wild. Derek Chauvin was charged with murder, found guilty of murder. The other three men were charged with also murder and manslaughter. The white officer, Thomas Lane, and the half-black officer, J. Alexander King, they took a guilty plea, and so they made a plea deal, and they pled down to just manslaughter, and they got sentenced. Tu Tao refused to make a deal, and he was the only holdout, which really upset me because I think it made it look so much worse for the Asian community. Not only did three men admit that they were guilty, but the one holdout was an Asian man who still refuses to admit that he could have stopped and saved someone's life, right? So he was the holdout, and he opted for a trial with no jury. And it was last week, I believe, that the judge found him guilty. And so we're still waiting for Tu Tao to be sentenced.
And
so the case is not done yet. It's been 3 years and it's not over.
So from a career standpoint, you said this was a very career impacting events.
Yeah.
You expand on that?
I don't think I realized that. So I had been working in New York City, and when I had the job offer in Minneapolis, my idea was that it would be slow and quiet and suburban.
Coming
and
from
outdoorsy.
New York City, that whole market, it's
Right. I mean, I had done the New York City, life and chasing news and stuff like that. I don't think I should have known the amount of outrage, justifiably so, that something like this would cause. I don't think we realized the amount of buildings that were burned in Minneapolis, the amount of small business and minority-owned businesses that were destroyed. Like, everything changed. And then people forget that George Floyd was murdered 3 months into the pandemic. So my life was already crazy because that was when everyone was home. They were watching the news. News reporters were on overdrive trying to figure out, what was going on with the virus. What was the state doing with the shutdown? And then all of a sudden I was out there covering these massive protests during a time where COVID was spreading. So I felt like between, almost like a 24/7 operation of trying to keep up with pandemic news. Now you're keeping up with social justice news. And it was like, I felt like I hadn't slept in 2 years during my, entire time that I worked in Minneapolis.
So that case was, like you said, 6 months you were into Minneapolis, and it pretty much, it was, I won't say career defining, but it was like, it was a huge part of your, huge part of your career while there. I mean, how, I guess, with going kind of back to the memoir, what was being titled More to Tell? What is it that let's kind of let's move into that topic. Like, sure. What is it that you wanted to kind of
sure. So I have the book here. And I think you found me through Kenneth. So I did an interview with Kenneth when, even before this book was like tangible, it was still being edited when I first went on his show. So it's like amazing to be able to, you know what I mean? Like, you think this thing has been in my head for like 3 years. So to be able to like touch it and feel it is a good feeling. But so that's me. And the opening chapter, just to tease the book a little bit, is it was the second night of riots and the first night of curfews, because so many buildings were getting burned down. So the governor enforced, I think it was like an 8 p.m. curfew. my photographer and I, my photog, and I are running around filming all these protesters, right? So I'm live on TV, talking. Like, we don't even do commercials
Wow.
anymore at this point. Like, it was almost like a CNN, but they didn't cut to commercials because buildings were just on fire. Like, there was no point, you know, like, people literally just wanted to see what was happening. So I'm running from one end to another. There's like the Bank of America is getting looted. People are breaking through ATM machines. Like, all this stuff is going on. There's like explosions happening behind me, and I'm live on air. And then all of a sudden I look at my camera guy and he starts pointing behind me. And I don't know what's going on because I'm still, you know, talking. I'm listening to the anchors, you know, talk back and forth. And he's just like frantically pointing behind me. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on. So I just wrap up. I'm like, okay, great. You know, we'll come back to you in 5 minutes, something like that. I close out. He and I turn around and the rioters are about to set our news van on fire.
Oh my goodness.
So now, Crystal, now living in Atlanta, I'd be like, good luck, news van. Like, not my problem, right? Back then, I don't know why, but you had this instinct where like, you just want to save property. Like, for some reason, it was like, that was my news van. I have to go save it. So he and I pick up our gear and we start running and we get back inside the news van, which was like the dumbest thing we could do. And then all of a sudden I look and there is like lines of police in riot gear, like essentially literally like that.
Yeah.
All of their riot gears, right? Standing, looking at our news van. And behind us are like all these protesters, like with torches, basically. Like, that was what was going on. And our van is right in the middle. And I'm screaming, I'm screaming, yeah, I'm screaming. I'm telling them, like, you got to back up the car, because they started pulling out their, you know, guns, like rubber bullets, tear gas, real bullets. Like, I knew anything could happen if one of the protesters themselves pulled out a gun, right? Like, we're literally in a war zone, essentially. So I'm screaming. I'm like, you have to back up the car. You have to back up the car. And we look behind us, and now the rioters are using our car as a shield. So he's like, we can't back up, Crystal. And there are curse words, so I'm trying not to curse, but in the book, there are curse words about how this goes down. So he's like, we can't back up because we'll kill someone. And I was almost like, I don't care. Like, we got to get out, because as they were pulling up their guns, I was like, I know the minute they fire the tear gas, it gets into the van and we're done with. Like, I can't get out and run from the van, because I know that if they see me, it could be a sudden movement, and then the police could fire something at me because they don't know why this girl just, you know, like jumped out of the car and started running. So we are just stuck in between the clash and read the book to find out how I got out of it. But I'm here, I'm alive. But yeah, that's chapter 1. So, you know, that's chapter 1. That's chapter 1 of more to tell. So there is a lot left to tell about what happened in Minneapolis.
But beyond just the George Floyd, you also do share a little bit about your journey and your experience working in the news industry as a woman, right?
Yeah.
Is it just comprehensive of just your overall experience in all the different markets you worked at, or was it primarily in Minneapolis?
No, so a lot of it was just Minneapolis. I draw on other reflections throughout the book about my time in Rhode Island, my time in Washington State, but the most racism and sexism I have ever experienced in my career, and this is after working in 6 different states, was in Minneapolis.
Wow.
And I hate to say that I'm just not surprised that that was ground zero for social justice after what I experienced as an Asian woman, never minding what I would have experienced if I were a Black man. I can't even imagine. But as an Asian woman, the amount of racism I experienced, Oda, was extreme. Like, I'm still in therapy. Extreme. And the book goes into that.
I mean, just touch on a few points, just so I have some context.
Yeah. So my newsroom was ran by very old white men. And they didn't like the idea of me speaking up and saying things during editorial meeting. And I was never disrespectful. I would just, the point of an editorial meeting is reporters come in and we tell the managers what our news ideas are for the day. The managers say yes or no. Everyone discusses if they like the story or not. I think they felt like I was too opinionated or not what they expected of an Asian woman to be. So one manager called me in and said, from now on, I only want to hear you say yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Am I clear? And that was also chapter 2. So that was just kind of the climate that Minneapolis was. I had a woman I went to my friend's like business networking party in Minneapolis. She was like a financial planner, and everyone's drunk, right? Whatever. And so one woman, white woman, pulls me aside and is like, you know, what are you? And I know what she means. You know what someone means when they say, what are you? But I'm just like, okay. So we go back and forth, and finally I'm like, well, my parents are Vietnamese. I'm Vietnamese American. I was born here. And she goes, I love your people. And the minute someone, I mean, you know that feeling too, like the minute like your people is involved in a sentence, like I know this is about to spin out of control real fast. So she goes, you know, I'm glad your people are here, because if your people weren't here, I wouldn't have a way to get my nails done, and I wouldn't be able to eat pho. And I'm telling you, this is chapter 2. There are 21 chapters in this book. So yeah, like there's a lot more to tell, because I just hope that in writing this book, in shining a light in the amount of discrimination that minorities face, that women face, that people don't try and keep denying that racism exists, because they can see what's happening, and they can see the amount of pent-up anger that led to our country erupting like that.
I want to get your thoughts on the film that was about the Fox News organization.
Yes.
And I think they touched on, or the director really wanted to touch on sexism, right?
Yeah.
And so, did you watch the film, and what was your thoughts on
Bombshell,
it?
right? Bombshell.
Bombshell.
Yeah, I actually I thought Megyn Kelly was a very good anchor. She's problematic in many, many ways, but I thought she did what her audience needed to do. So I was always kind of captivated by her as someone who was like I guess she's like a very outspoken woman.
I tap into her. I watch her YouTube channel. She's you know, there's she's really interesting.
Yeah, the homegirl gets a little bit racist and sexist against herself too, which is bizarre, but she's very, I don't know, she's well spoken, I guess. But yeah, so Bombshell. So news is such a male dominated, like man's world. People think, and what's interesting is that when I ask you, say, to picture a reporter, you probably picture a female reporter, right? Just because that's like the archetype, like you picture a beautiful woman in a dress standing in front of the TV, you know, whatever it may be. Women are actually outnumbered in news 3-1. And behind the scenes, I haven't seen that many female photographers, you know, so you remember the female news reporters, but you forget that there are all these men talking before you even see her. It's the American Journalist Association, they looked at, I believe it was the top 20 biggest markets in the country. So like Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, top 20 biggest regions. They found that 25% of those TV stations did not have a single Asian person representing the news on TV. So you know, the numbers are stacked against me as a woman, and the numbers are very stacked against me as an Asian woman. And that was kind of the climate that I was walking into. And at that point, I had kind of hoped, being in Minneapolis, that, you know, you could create change from the inside. But then I think realizing very quickly in the book, you know, when you have people that are determined to silence you to the point where they're literally telling me from now on, they only want me to say yes sir, yes ma'am, like it's a whole different story. And a part of the book, why I wrote it, not because it was fun for me to think about ways that I was discriminated against.
I don't see it as well. There's a lot of deep stuff you gotta and places you gotta get back into to share this. It's very personal. This is very personal.
It wasn't like a fun, you know, like journey really writing the book. But I think the point of writing the book is for every person who's been silenced and felt discriminated against and felt they couldn't fight back or talk back. I hope that someone looks at my book and says, she just talked back. She finally raised her voice and she said something back to the person, the man, the boss, whoever it may be, who told her to sit down and shut up. And I hope that that's what it means, right? Because, you know, culturally, Vietnamese culture, Asian culture, like we're taught to be compliant, to be submissive, to be agreeable, to hide our feelings. You know, like I wasn't allowed to get angry growing up. My parents would be like, you know, go in the other room, settle your emotions, then join us, you know, when you're done, whatever it is, right?
Or the term would be like, they say, Gio, just take it, or like just suppress it, you know.
Yeah, or they say, thôi đi, đủ
Thôi
rồi,
đi.
đủ rồi. Yeah, thôi đi,
I heard
đủ
that a
rồi.
lot.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like gaslighting, right? It was like the early stages of gaslighting. So I hope that the book makes people feel more empowered when they read it and go like, wow, this girl went through some stuff. Even as someone that was seen as, you know, famous or, you know, however people perceived me, I was even going through some stuff. And I hope that them being like, wow, she really has had enough and wrote a book about it and is speaking out about injustice. Like, I hope that encourages other Asians, especially our generation, to make more noise, because the hate crimes will not stop unless we as a people learn to make noise. We just can't sit in silence. Like, you know, there's no more thôi đủ rồi. Like, why? Like, we can't feel that way about hate crimes, you know? And maybe it works for our parents' generation because they really were just trying to assimilate. But for us, like, enough has to be enough. And I think that's how the book happened, because I finally had enough and I didn't want to just move on to Atlanta, you know, enjoy the beautiful life I have now and pretend that none of that happened. Because if I did, more Asians will experience exactly what I did in the news industry. And so I hope my book begins to change that.
Would you say this closes your chapter from your news reporter, that career path, and so you can move on to, I want to talk about spotlight communication as well. Yeah, would you say this is kind of that good
I don't know. Who knows? I would say right now, like, I don't have any intentions of going back to like daily news reporting in the same capacity I did. But like you said, I get asked to do, you know, random news segments here and there, and I like that because then I'm not bound to a potentially sexist and racist boss, you know. So it's kind of nice to be able to pick and choose like what causes I care about, and then do like media appearances for those causes. So maybe the book is kind of closed, but maybe there's a different book in the process.
I'm curious because there's, to be even more specific, we talked about Asian American female reporters. Now to even mention Vietnamese American female reporters, that list goes down a lot smaller. Do you happen to know any of the other Vietnamese American news reporters?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. So like, we all chat with each other on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. I don't know them personally, but I do know a lot of other Asian reporters personally. The Asian American Journalists Association is amazing. They have just done such a great job in, you know, connecting Asians with other Asians. When I moved to Atlanta, the first person that welcomed me was Chris Jose, Filipino male reporter. He was the first male at the scene, I believe, or the first reporter at the scene when the spa shootings happened in Atlanta. So that was when 8 people were killed, including 6 Asian women. Chris Jose was the first person there. So incredible ally. Like, I felt like he was a brother to me the minute I got to Atlanta, because I knew no one here. And so I think those, you know, that kinship amongst Asians, because there are so few of us in news, is so powerful. You know, to know me, like, getting down to Atlanta the first day, there would be someone ready to take me out to lunch purely because we are Asian and we understand the oppression that we each face, was like incredible support.
Awesome. Then if you were to give an advice to somebody who is actually wanting to get into this world, an Vietnamese American girl in college, what would you say to her right now?
You know, it's funny because when you ask that, like, my initial instinct is to say don't, which is probably not the real, you know, like, I hate that was the first thing I thought of, but honestly, based on my experience, like, in a way, that's how I feel. Like, traditional mainstream media is not welcoming of Asians. That's why 25% of TV stations still don't have an Asian person. I would say read the book, read More to Tell, and talk to other Asian American news reporters from AHA and see if that is the career you want to get into. I think had someone told me about the amount of racism and experience I would have experienced as an Asian woman, like maybe I still would have done it. You know, like who knows? Maybe I would have been like, that's fine, I can take that on. But I wish I knew what I was getting into before I got into it. So I think that would be my advice is if you're looking to be a news reporter, pretend you are already one and start interviewing other people about how they feel about being Asian in news, and then make a decision as to whether or not that's an industry you want to join.
And I think the context of your, because again, kind of I asked that question because there's not many, because I focus primarily on the Vietnamese diaspora communities, and if a person that's listening is Vietnamese, I think that pointing to your book is a great suggestion, because you are it's so relatable because they are Vietnamese themselves, right? And kind of trying to get into this space. So yeah, that's the reason why I
And I will say, what has been like, so this is like a dream come true for me. I had a professor reach out to me from the University of Alabama, Black professor, but he teaches diversity in journalism, like very proactive, you know, pushing for diversity in news, essentially. He reached out, asked for an advance copy of More to Tell. He
Awesome.
tested the book on his students last semester just to see how the book would land with them, how it would go. They wrote papers on it. He was floored by his students' reactions, journalism students in Alabama, right? Deep South. And so now the University of Alabama is looking to carry More to Tell in all of its bookstores. And so that makes me excited, is that, you know, these future journalism students or future journalists should know the context of what they're walking into, so that if they want to be a change maker, they already know the map of what needs to change. And I hope, if anything, that's what the book also does, is it's almost a blueprint of what we need to fix
I also
for news
want to know
stations for the country.
when was the official publish date? And because I know that you have your book launch event coming up on the 18th.
Yeah.
When is your, like, when did it actually was released?
Yeah, so the advance copies to book clubs and all that jazz, that went out April 1st. And then it just became available online, like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, pretty much any online bookstore, this month for Asian Heritage Month. So this is the first month that the public has been able to get access to the book. So it's been 2 weeks that More to Tell has been available. If you were able to read More to Tell before that, you probably were in a book club or got an advance copy somehow.
Awesome. And then for folks that are in Atlanta, are looking to come to the book launch, like what are they in store for?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. The book launch party is on Thursday. I almost didn't want to do it, and I think this is probably very like Asian of me too, right? Stereotypical Asian. Like, I didn't want the attention. I didn't feel like there should be this big, you know, like I was feeling kind of like bashful about like even doing a book launch event, because I was like, whatever, it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Nobles, like people can get it. And I had some amazing friends convince me to do it. I had Jasmine Hughes. She's an amazing lawyer and publicist. She is an ally. She's Black. We connected right away in understanding different types of racism that both our cultures experience. And so Jasmine really rallied me to do a book launch party. So that is on Thursday. It's at Parlor in Atlanta. It's Southwest Atlanta, kind of near the Carter Center. And I actually work for the Carter Center. So it's near that area. You can find tickets online. You can just go to crystalbui.com. crystalbui.com, and you can look at book information, book launch information. It's just going to be a party. So, you know, that's really all it is. It's just a big celebration of, I think, me putting in 3 years of work to go through the process to tell this story, and to finally refuse to be quiet. I think that's what the party is about, is making noise. And I hope that other Asians who are watching this, other Vietnamese people watch this, know that, you know, there comes a time where we need to make noise. And I think that time is now.
I think the celebration is very important. So I'm glad you did decide to do this, as well as just in a way, I do feel this would be kind of therapeutic, that like to get all these people to come and, and support you, and just this body of work. It's 3 years of your life, and you had to revisit some dark places to even get it out there on paper. So absolutely, I'm happy for you that you've chosen to do our book launch.
Thank you.
Kind of moving on to your next career path, which is being the CEO of Spotlight Communication Group. tell us a little bit about Spotlight, and then
Mhm.
also, yeah, what motivated you to get into to
Yeah,
open the next chapter?
yeah. So Spotlight Communications Group, it is a strategic communications firm. So what we do is we help branding, messaging, marketing, publicity, sales for business owners, entrepreneurs, public figures, nonprofits. One of my clients, like I said, is the Carter Center. So Jimmy Carter's nonprofit is one of my clients. And so what I do is I help get them press and publicity, and I
Nice.
help them build a brand, and I help them have a voice in the landscape, and I help them share their stories. So I think a part of this was, the next natural progression of my career was I was on one end of things, right? Being a news reporter and trying to give people a voice that way. And then now I'm on the other end, the publicity end. And most of my clients have actually been Black or Asian or women. And so I feel a certain level of pride being able to help those people get their name, their work, their businesses, their passions out there. So yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I'm excited. There's a couple candidates that I'm looking to work with. So I think that's going to change a lot of things if we get more minorities elected, because that's important representation as well. So that's what the firm does.
Awesome. Just a fun question about regarding going back to Vietnam. Have you ever
Yeah.
made a trip back to Vietnam?
What's
In your
funny?
adult?
Kenneth asked me the same question. So now I feel like you two are in cahoots with each other because I think that was his last question as well. I went back. I must have only been in like third grade, second or third grade. So I haven't gone back since. And I should, but I don't know if I'm one of those people that's like, okay, I saw it and I want to see every country. Like I'm kind of one of those people.
Mhm.
But Kenneth has been working on me to like go back to Vietnam, which I should. I do have tickets booked too, which is not the same thing, but I am going to Singapore in October. So maybe I can, finagle my way around a little bit or something like that.
In addition to that, like what countries would you say you've had an awesome experience in, and you would highly recommend?
You know, so I always thought, and I think this is also very stereotypical, like Asian woman. I just for a while didn't think it would be safe, and many people told me it wouldn't be safe to travel alone. So I always
Yeah.
thought I needed to have a boyfriend travel with me, a husband travel with me, a group of friends, but even if it was all girlfriends, that would somehow still be dangerous, right? Like that was kind of the perception. And then after my aunt passed away, and she was like a mother to me, her favorite thing was traveling. And I think to honor her, I try and do these like annual trips by myself to a different country. And that was kind of how it started. So it only started when I was like 27, where it was the first time I was like, I'm just going to get on a plane by myself, go to a different country as a female solo traveler and just see what happens. And I absolutely fell in love. And so the first country I did that at was 10 days in Costa Rica. I think
I
literally
have fun
because there was a
in Costa Rica.
sale.
Yeah.
And there was like a sale. It was like $290. It was all I could afford, like round trip at 27 years old. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. I think that,
$290?
yeah,
Wow.
I flew from Rhode Island to Costa Rica and it was like $296. I was making like 40 grand at the time, and so I was like, traveling wasn't even on my mind. But I think Costa Rica will always be my answer because it's special to me that it's the first place I went by myself as, a female traveler, which is rare. It's becoming better. And I think more women are feeling confident about doing that. But, years ago, we didn't see it as much.
Do you still
So
keep it an annual tradition?
yes, I try and go when I can every year. So I have done, and I like more tropical kind of places, and budget wise, it's always been kind of closer. So I did Bermuda, which was okay. I don't think it was as festive and, different terrain, I guess, as Costa Rica. I did Puerto Rico, not a different country, but amazing. What else have I done? I don't know. There's been a bunch, but I haven't done it as often. So I think Singapore is going to be my longer flights. It's like two 14-hour flights out of Atlanta. So I don't even know. I don't know how I'm going to do. I think I need to be like tranquilized in order to get through
Yeah.
that. I don't know how
Mine
people do it.
The only part I don't like about going to the East or to Asia is the long
Yeah.
flight. Other than that,
Yeah.
I love going to Asia, but it's uh, just being out for that long is
Yeah.
takes
I
a toll on
I
your
don't
body.
know how I'm gonna do it. Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna do it because Costa Rica I think was like 4 hours. Puerto
Hmm.
Rico was like 3. So that it's doable travel. So 2 14-hour flights. I don't know. Maybe I just won't come back because that's kind of a long ways back.
And then you want to make the best of it when you're out there, right? And but then I would say a word of advice for all the time you go to Asia is you don't take a nap when you get there because then you just sleep
Oh,
through.
really? Okay.
Yeah,
So just keep going.
you got to keep
Okay.
going because then that way you can start getting into the regular schedule. It's not easy, but
Yeah.
yeah. Congratulations on the book. I'm
Thank you.
really excited.
Yes. One more plug.
I definitely
More to tell.
want to read
Everyone.
it.
Good. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. Here's a plug. Or if you want the author signed copy of More to Tell, go to moretotellbook.com. Literally, the orders show up and I see them and I sign a book and I send them out. So if you want a book directly from me, go to moretotellbook.com. Or if you just want a book, you can go Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any of that.
So I'm honored that this was your first IG Live interview ever.
Yes.
And
Yes,
also
first IG Live. I'm less scared of it now. I was a little panicked about it, but now I know how to do it, I think. I don't think I know how to moderate it, but at least I know how to join.
I can give you the play-by-play on how to do it.
Okay.